So hello everyone and welcome to Community Conversations. We are having a virtual conversation today with a very special guest, Candace Daniel. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for those of you who may not know, Candace is the CTV Barrie news anchor at the 6 and 11 o'clock news and has had quite a long career already in journalism. She started working as an intern for Global News Toronto and then became an associate producer for Global's National Toronto Bureau. Moving her career forward, she had an opportunity to move out west and report full-time and then joined the Global News Morning Regina team. Maybe we'll talk a bit about that.
For sure.
One of the things as well is it seems that you have quite an extensive experience in being a backfill producer, news anchor, evening news reporter, weather reporter, certainly well-versed in all of the ins and outs of a newsroom. It's great to have you here in the Barrie community with such a great extensive background. So
thanks. Appreciate that.
We're not really here to talk about business, but we are here to have a conversation with you about, your experience in journalism in these times, but as a Black woman and as a mother. So maybe we'll start with, tell us a little bit about where you grew up.
Sure. Well, I grew up in two notorious parts of Toronto. I guess overarching notorious part would be Scarborough, but within that there are little neighborhoods. My first memories are of the neighborhood called Galloway, which is unfortunately what a lot of people would be considered disadvantaged, not because of a lack of good people or heart, but just, socioeconomic issues that put a great deal of the community there at a disadvantage. And, I was one of them, raised by a single mother, 3 daughters, and we were lucky to find a home there. But when things got too tough, we moved to a new neighborhood at the time, brand new building. It's called Malvern, right on the corner of Nielsen and Sewell's. It was a brand new co-op, so a brand new subsidized housing building that my mom was able to get us into, and spent maybe from 8 to 16 there. And then once again, my mother, the hero that she is, moved out when things got a little rough there to Pickering as well. So I've seen a lot of Southern Ontario, and I've seen a lot of the community. I've been a part of a lot of the communities that are front and center today.
One of the comments I remember when we had our initial conversation, you mentioned that you might speak a few words in so many languages because of the multicultural nature of your environment growing up.
Absolutely. I think the early 90s were a bit of a tipping point in terms of our society and our community, where there was Black people, there were Afghanis, there were Iranians, there was Chinese, and that whole multiculturalism educational point was not lost on the teachers in my school at the time, and it was actually encouraged. We had potluck, and everyone was able to bring in things from their traditions, their homes, and that left an indelible mark. And I think that a lot of people from Scarborough would echo those sentiments too. You probably know how to say hello in Chinese, Greek, Italian, just because it was always in your ear, and it was a place where new Canadians would flock to, and there were a lot of first generation Canadians that I think would call Scarborough their home.
I find it interesting thinking about that as an environment to grow up in, because it seems more like it was about integration rather than assimilation. Did you feel like your own culture, you could live that every day and be yourself?
I think that's part of the beauty of Scarborough, is that there is that freedom. There's definitely a large West Indian Caribbean contingent. There's a large East Indian contingent. You can go from certain parts on Lawrence and you'll find what looks like an Arab bazaar, and then go further up and you're in a Chinatown. And I think that is beautiful about Scarborough, and they've done as good a job as they can into just maintaining that mosaic and everyone respecting the mosaic of cultures that's represented there.
I love the idea of a mosaic, and certainly in a community that's so populous, it's maybe easier to maintain than when you move to smaller centers in Canada that wouldn't be as urbanized. Absolutely. We can chat maybe a little bit about that when you've had to move around as an adult to places that were not as sort of urban. Now, you
Absolutely.
mentioned that your mom's Barbadian, your dad's Trinidadian, so you have already a multicultural background there, and you have a daughter who is also multiracial background, multicultural background.
For sure. Again, the uniting thread is that Caribbean culture, the West Indian culture, and you see that across the board, I think, especially in things like Caravana. The music unites, and there are certain aspects of the culture that unite. So I identify as, a first generation Canadian with West Indian roots, but my daughter, she has my background, and plus she's Italian Sicilian. So that's
multinational.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Quite proud of it. And but it does, there are things that have come up recently and things that have come up in her adolescence and now early adulthood that I've become aware of. And it's also made me aware of some of my own blind spots where it comes to mixed race people, and how we classify them and how we characterize them and our expectations of them as well. And I'm trying to, especially in this current climate, just give her the space to breathe and find her own identity and find her own opinions in this, knowing that her mother is Black and her father is white. So yeah.
Interesting. So you use the language of how we classify them and identify them. Who is the we that you're referencing?
Well, I guess I would say the Black culture in general. And, that's part of it. Like, we have a heritage where we've bought into that one drop rule. We've bought into, if your mother's this, then you're that. And that's not necessarily the case. And she's opened my eyes to that in having these dialogues. Like, if anything, I believe, instead of just kind of grouping them into, mixed people, well, if you're half Black, you're kind of Black. Actually, no, there's respect due to both sides. And I think finally in 2020, we are recognizing them as a race and a people unto themselves. And I think that's part of moving forward, not just making our own assumptions, making our own generalizations and claiming one for us, for our team. And so, those archaic notions, I think it's time to do away with them. And I believe my daughter has taught me that.
An example of that. And I feel that sensation. I was raised in a family that, I have a Black birth father and a white birth mother, but I was raised in an all white household. So, it's very hard to separate parts of myself into a category where my skin makes me be labeled in one way as part of the Black community. And a lot of parts of what I've experienced as my personal culture don't relate to a Black culture. So it becomes the balance between, identifying ourselves as individuals. I think ultimately at the end of this, it's that each individual brings value, and there shouldn't be any separation from those values based on any of these characteristics.
Exactly. And, of course, as well, that goes back a long, long ways. And, there's a lot of issues within the Black community that we have to deal with on our own as well, not the least of which is colorism. So, it's a good step forward.
It's an interesting time. I mean, you mentioned that you had experiences when your daughter was younger where, it was complicated in that sense, and you feel like it's really different now. Was it just that people's minds are open because of the current climate and all of the things that have happened with George Floyd and the rallies? Like, is this shift in the last couple of months, or is it something that you're seeing that's been around for a while?
Well, I think the shift has been a long time coming, and a lot of what we're seeing right now has been a long time coming. Not to sound cliche, but it's the truth. And when she was born in 2000, just being a different skin tone than me, a lot of people assumed I was the nanny.
Yeah.
And, once that kind of dissipated and she was in school age and everything, I would ask her, because I knew, again, growing up in Scarborough, where you have all those cultures, for sure you feel at ease around all of those cultures, but everybody is identifying very hardcore with those cultures. So it's, I'm Greek, I'm Black, I'm Jamaican, I'm Trini. And I would question her and say, because just wanted to know where she would fit into all of that. She's like, I don't know. I don't, like, she'd have a friend and I'd be like, oh, Chloe, whatever her last name was. Is she Italian? That sounds Italian. I don't know. We don't really talk about that. Like, it's not really a thing. Like, I don't know. And I was like, that's interesting. That's a shift that from one generation to the next that
Absolutely.
not present. So it's been a lot of little steps, I think. And I, I, I definitely think we've experienced a tipping point in the last couple of months. That's for sure. But it's also been cumulative. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a bit about that tipping point. I think it might be a good segue into, your role, not as a mother, but as a news anchor and a reporter working in this environment right now. Over top of it's COVID, then there comes all of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is long overdue. How are you experiencing that as a journalist?
Yeah. The kind of one of the paramount rules in journalism is that 99.9% of the time, your feelings and your opinion have no place in this story. And that's comforting a lot of times. But, as a news anchor in let's just call it for what it is, a predominantly white audience, I can't help but feel that there's a added level of scrutiny and spotlight put on me as a Black person reporting about these long-standing issues within the Black community and within our country. And, it's been at times difficult to navigate, at times difficult to, produce, and then also I would assume for the audience to consume. But I do believe that the facts will reign supreme, and that is what I'm relying on, is just, tell the story, tell it as it is, and trust that your audience will get what they need from it. And it's been challenging. I don't know how else to really put it. It's, again, because it's ingrained in you as a journalist. You don't have feelings. You don't speak out about things like this. And, there have been times that I've wanted to. There have been times where that's even been a struggle to even know what valuable contribution I would add to the conversation that is being so really poetically lived out in the streets. So, other than to say it's a challenge, I think that's where I'm at right now.
I could see that it could be very, very tough. I know there's been a lot of emotions myself and my family and other friends that are experiencing this within the Black community, and not being in your job where you have to put that aside, report on the story, and then when the cameras are off and you're back at home, then you can become yourself. I mean, I feel for you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And, you do hold a lot into the weekend, and it does become this place where it's just, just keep through Monday, okay, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, weekend, and then just, here we are. And,
Breathe.
Feeling, exactly. And I've been dealing with it as best as I know how, journaling, getting a clearer sense of my own feelings on the matter, keeping physically active, moving, walking, just, because it's heavy and you feel that weight when you stop. And
exactly.
So I've just been trying to make it as productive of a time as I can for me personally. But, just even interpersonally within the news station, it's awkward. It's really awkward because you do have those emotions to contend with, and you got to kind of check yourself when a very well-intentioned coworker might be, we're talking about George Floyd here, might be like, isn't it horrible? And then your tendency is to want to fly around and be like, it's been horrible. You know what I mean? Like, the first time, like, it's been horrible for a time now, for centuries now. And again, it's been a delicate dance. It's been something I've had to consciously navigate and just look at through a different lens, the journalist lens. Yeah.
There's actually a group of journalists, women of color, called Media Girlfriends, And I don't know if there's an opportunity for you to reach out to that group and just look to be sharing. They're all having similar experiences during this time, and it wasn't formulated because of the George Floyd or Black Lives Matter. It's existed for a couple of years, but it is nice to know that you have a network of people who you can express what's happening and have those conversations with. It would lift the weight, I think.
For sure. And that's been so uplifting and inspiring to see. I'm not a part of it, unfortunately, but just to know that, you know, there is a network for all of us, and for those who are participating in it right now, that they do have that sisterhood or sorority and that network of support. Because I can only imagine, like, I'm in Barrie, but what would it be like in Toronto? I wonder, you know, like if I feel magnified here, it can only be so much greater down south in Toronto. So I'm super proud that has been developed, and I'm super proud to see the voices that have emerged from that, and the education that's going on to the population at large.
Yeah, great. So talking a little sidebar about COVID. So overarching all of this, we're in a slowly being released lockdown. Things have been crazy. How has that been for you as the news anchor?
You know, I guess the word of the day is challenge. It's been a challenge, and you know, that was tough. Just as a human being, that was tough. We were all kind of navigating this unknown, unprecedented pandemic that nobody's ever lived through. And you know, I just found, especially in March and April, it found like it was just all death, spread, province by province, categorizing how many people have died, how many people are infected, the long-term care homes, you know, and a lot of which are in my hometown. You know, Scarborough is a hot spot right now, so that is definitely a concern. And just as a human being, that was difficult. And in terms of looking at American media too, and just seeing how different things are there, and then obviously how it seems like there's no story in America where race doesn't come into play. And of course that was particularly in COVID, and to hear that Black and brown people were particularly hard hit during the pandemic in the States, you know, I was concerned that it was going to turn into a Black and brown disease rather than, you know, the pandemic and the human disease that it is. You know, again, you want to trust your audience, but at the same time, you know, it's a realization that Black and brown people make up a disproportionate amount of who is on the front lines in these quote unquote essential jobs, the grocery stores, the PSWs, the people that can't stay home from work for whatever reason. And that's why they're affected. So it was, again, it's been a little bit of and to have them one on top of the other too, it's been a journey, and it's checked my own blind spots. And I think that's where societally, I think that's what both COVID and Black Lives Matter have done, is forced us to check our blind spots, served as mirrors for us to see where we are lacking and where we're lacking societally and individually in terms of understanding, compassion, empathy, all of that, and education. So I'm in it with you. You know, I'm a human being. I'm still in it as well. As much as it seems like I'm just Candace Daniel reporting the news, it's actually, you know, I'm feeling it too. So.
You had mentioned to me that there was sort of a positive feeling in the sense of your role as a community source of information, a guide in the community. Would you speak a little bit to that you felt evolved with COVID and your role as the anchor?
Absolutely. I would definitely say COVID has been a turning point for the relationship between me and my audience. You know, I was just kind of dropped in out of nowhere, right? Like, after there was a long-standing anchor and I totally get it. Like, I was raised on the news, just, you know, my mom turning on the news, there's Ken Shaw, and, you know, we'd all sit down and just watch that, so I get it. And then all of a sudden I'm just kind of dropped in, and like all relationships, that takes time to build. But I will give my audience credit that they are very sensitive and discerning, and I think they did get the sense that I am in it with them. I live in the community with them. You see me at the mall. This is affecting me as much as it is you. And lockdown, forcing everybody, indoors, and kind of forcing them, well, not forcing them, but, just, I became a focal point at the supper hour, I would probably say. And it kind of bridged the gap. I think it allowed everybody to see me as a human going through this challenge with them, rather than just some woman who was dropped in and is now doing the news every day. So,
right. That is a good way to have an outcome. I think it just build a bond, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I had a couple of other questions. Were a little bit about, maybe conversations that you've had with your daughter about all of the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd's death. I know that, my daughter's 14, and it was really tough to speak with her about not just George Floyd, but the number of different things that have happened in the last couple of months. And I think she was really upset by a lot of it and didn't know how to process that. Did you have a similar experience with your daughter? I know she's a little bit older, but.
For sure. I think everybody gets right and wrong, and everybody can, clearly say this is right and this is wrong, and what has been happening is wrong. But beyond that, when we get into that nebulous territory of, just, again, and I've said this to you before, when you're talking about systemic, that's what it is. It's systemic. It's widespread, and we are all parts of that system. And we have to sit down and recognize, what our part in the system has been, and how we've perpetuated or tolerated or just been a part of that establishment that has kept these belief systems in place. And again, I am being patient with her, especially, just because we've never had to really deal with this first and foremost. And if it sounds like I'm struggling a bit, it's because I've never had to sit here and articulate my feelings about this matter to this degree ever. Yeah. So I thank you for the opportunity, but it's tough. Yeah. As a grown woman, never mind, these children in their teens who, with the best intentions, we've raised in a bit of an insulated manner, because, they go to the good schools and they have all of their friends, and, life is a rainbow, and we want that for them. We wanted that. We, by no means did we ever want them to experience the hardships that our parents had to endure, that our grandparents had to endure. So we, did our part in creating this idyllic world for them. And now, for all intents and purposes, it's kind of all crashing down. So
totally. I mean, because the idyllic world that we created was still underneath the whole realm of this structure is there. We just become part of the structure. And that's unfortunately where I feel like that assimilation piece, that's what's happened. People talk about, there was a young woman, I think she was in grade 12 in Innisfil, and told me like everything's great at her school. She's one of very few Black people at her school. And what became clear to me is that she just doesn't raise anything. She doesn't bring it up. She doesn't focus on anything about her culture, which she's very enriched in her home life. Mm-hmm. But she can't wait to go out of Innisfil, go to Toronto, where there are more people who can understand her culture, and she can be really herself. So I feel like somehow, not noticing that people are differences, it almost erases the diversity and the value of that they could bring to the conversation. It's almost like it's just gone smooth. We've smoothed it all together, and now it's broken, open. I don't know how deeply it's open, because I was going to read this and ask you your opinion on this. So I write a column, occasionally an opinion column for one of the local newspapers, and I recently wrote one about about racism, and it's real. And in Simcoe County, it's not just the States, it's not just somewhere else. And I received a couple of emails back about it. And one of them was from an 82-year-old white woman And I wanted to just get your thoughts on this. So she watched a couple of my community conversations and made a comment because they're available online.
Well, that's good.
She did go. I think she's on the edge of making a breakthrough. So I'm trying to figure out, how do we do this? Mm-hmm. So she wrote in her note that I watched the tapes and really enjoyed some of them. What I didn't see was anything about Black people learning about whites, our customs, laws, traditions, etc. That would have made it more even, Stephen. So I just felt like, okay. And one of the other comments that she had put was, now white people, excluding the rich, are not included of anything in our own country. We're made to feel like outsiders. We don't deserve this. We've done nothing to earn it. It's my opinion, whatever country a person moves to, you should respect their laws and ways, etc. You have equality. Is it superiority that you want? So the reason I'm sharing this with you is because, this is an 82-year-old woman, grandma, great-grandma, and doesn't see this. In fact, sees that anytime we raise this, that what we're trying to do is take things away from white people and downplay any hardships that they've had, that then, and I just think that there's certainly a large percentage, I would say, of people who probably have some of this thinking and they just haven't verbalized it or raised it. So, what can we do? What can we do to move forward when the divide is still so big? Like, what are the steps or pieces that you think, just you as a person, like where do we go with that?
Well, I guess all I can do is offer my own personal experience as someone who has, had a lot of white allies in my life, who has white people that I consider loved ones and family, and, where time and again, you do come up, maybe not to that degree, but you do come up to a level of resistance when you get to certain topics, and you feel that resistance. I've always believed that, and see that, that's so, because your instinct is to want to, well, what do you mean? The curriculum in the school is entirely based on Anglo-Canadian history, Anglo-colonial, Canadian history. So, that's a particular tough one. I definitely respect and recognize your challenge there, but my stance has always been to, have compassion and realize that it's, everybody has the responsibility to educate themselves, but again, that's part of what systemic is. It is so ingrained, so woven in, and sometimes so insidiously woven in and imperceptibly woven in that, we don't know. So this poor woman, well, not poor woman, but, this woman who is clearly making an effort, but has come up against resistance within herself at this point, all you can do, I think, is just kind of lead with compassion, lead with patience. It will take time. There's no turning these perspectives and mindsets, including our own. That's not going to happen overnight. How it's going to happen, I believe, and how I've always lived my life is through the example I set, through the way I live my life, through, showing that I do matter, and that I am smart, and I am intelligent, and I do deserve respect, and my culture is as respectable or as worthy of respect as yours is. And, there's no reason why, like, one star shining in the sky does not mean that another star has to shine a little less bright, So I've always just kind of come from that space of patience, compassion, realizing, that in a lot of cases, they just don't, I don't want to say they, like, I want to make this an other situation, but a lot of folks just don't know any better. Yeah. And a lot of folks were just taught differently from what we know to be true. And, it's going to take a while to unravel all of those beliefs or change all of those beliefs. And all we can do is live our lives the best way that we can, and and hope that they see the truth in that.
And hopefully the idea, I think, long term is that we're building a new world together. You know, it
Yeah.
isn't going to look like it used to. Like I thought, like the normal, oh, when is the normal coming back? Well, I don't really think we're going to go back to a
Yeah.
normal that was. I think we have to create something new. And, you know, one of the definitions in terms of inclusion is that we come together and build something new together. We don't just add people to what's already there and hope they can survive.
Exactly.
You know, I think that's always been sort of my thinking, is you say it's diverse, but when the people who add the diversity, whether it's, you know, from the color of their skin, their ethnicity, religion, any of the other things that make up a diverse world, but the environment they go into isn't new. It's you're trying to just drop them into something that doesn't support diversity or inclusion. So we're going to have to create something new for sure. You know, I think that's a great opportunity to chat a little bit about how do we help the young people? You know, what would you help a young woman looking to the future with in terms of keeping on track, or advice that you would give, or a mantra that helped you, or a viewpoint that got you to where you are that you would like to pass on to them to give them inspiration?
For sure. And I guess let me preface this with saying that in terms of racism as a whole, racism in the workplace, at school, you know, I can't really say that I've suffered from that a lot or terribly. You know, I do have a great degree of privilege that I walk around with every day, that I've had to, you know, come to terms with and realize how that skews my perspective in some ways. And it's only been through talking to other Black women in media and other Black people in media that my eyes have been opened to how outright it can be, and how, you know, my colleagues and peers have been made to feel outright not welcome in some places, in some workplaces in this country. But, you know, and that's only reinforced my own mantra of, you just don't give up. Sometimes you just need a sheer will. Like, if you can just hang on by sheer will and sheer knowledge that what you're doing is right, and, you know, remembering why you're doing what you're doing as well, use that as your motivation, you will turn the tide, you will turn the wheel, and, you know, success is there to be had. So whatever it is that you want to pursue, just do not give up. And that was the case with me. As I've told you, this is a second career for me. I went back to school when my daughter was 6 years old. Challenges in and of itself, daycare, you know, and let's think about what a college schedule is. It's actually ridiculous. It's either a class at 8:30 in the morning, and then, you know, and you could go all the way till 7 at night, or, you know, your one class starts at 5:30. So childcare was an issue. My mother passed away in my third year of college as well. That was an issue. You know, there were so many hurdles to overcome, and there were many points where I was just like, okay, I'm done. Why am I doing this? You know, and that was at the college level, never mind before I even stepped foot into a workplace. So when I think back, and if I had quit, you know, I would have never known what this industry has to offer and what I was capable of achieving of. So I do believe in determination, grit, will, and, you know, that tenacity, and just never give up. Don't let anybody take your dreams from you, because it may take a while, but they definitely are achievable. Yeah.
So do you think you have this mantra from your own role models?
Yeah, I do, actually. I do.
Who
And
were they?
First and foremost was my mother. Absolutely. As I mentioned already, single mother raising 3 children. Came up from Barbados when she was essentially a girl, you know, early 20s. And when I think of how jarring moving from Toronto to Regina was, I can only imagine what it was like, you know, getting on the plane and getting off the plane in this brand new country where nobody looks like you, nobody speaks like you. So, you know, she's a hero to me in that. And also, it was her cancer diagnosis was actually one of the first steps that led me on this trajectory. It woke me up to my own mortality, woke me up to what are you doing with your life? And, you know, our time here is limited. So if there was one thing in this world that you could do, what would it be? And so that was what turned me at 26, 27 to go back to college and try and make this work. So she's been an inspiration, a champion, and a hero to me in many ways. I've also been very lucky that within our education system, I found a lot of teachers that were willing to, you know, offer guidance that they didn't have to. You know, I wasn't the, you know, I was smart, but I wasn't the most focused student. I wasn't the most, if anything, I was just so bored and I didn't want to go. I just, you know, I could have completely gone in a totally different track, particularly given the neighborhoods that I live in, right? So, you know, I had a lot of teachers that just were on me all the time, you know, whether it was making sure that I went to class, Mr. Say So, I'll never forget at Agincourt, you know, made sure I went to class. And, you know, grade 3, 4, Madame Moynihan, who was the one that encouraged me to get into the extended French program. And even up until college, there have been educators and teachers that have offered invaluable guidance, and I will forever be grateful to them. So they are. And then there are also the pioneers in the TV industry that made me even think that it was possible. And, you know, what was previously a fairly homogenous cast and crew of people. You know, I remember growing up seeing Monica Diol on Electric Circus, and that was just like, wow, who is this tall, beautiful Indian woman, like, you know, with this wildly successful show, Carly Nation on CTV, Andrew Case on CTV, you know, Kayla Gray as well. Like, from that generation all the way up until now, there's so many sources of inspiration, professionally and personally, that I'm so very fortunate to gain strength from.
Well, I hope that it adds something to your heart to know that all of the young women that are watching the CTV Barrie News at 6 and 11 have you as a representative role model as well.
That's wild to even think of, but I guess
there might be somebody doing an interview like this in, you know, 15, 10 years from now, and they'll say that they saw you on the CTV News and knew it could be possible. I think that's a great thing to have in our community, that we could certainly see more of different ethnicities that do live in our community represented in all of the places that you don't see them right now. Would be a way for people to understand what their opportunities are, what their future is. I think from a schooling system, I'd love to be able to see more of that. You know, have a career day where there's everyone of different ethnicities and all different types of careers, both genders and every type. And I think the children would learn that anything they want is within their reach when they see somebody else doing it.
And I think that is very important. You're absolutely right. I was able to partake in a lot of school visits out in Regina, and you could see their eyes light up. And, you know, that's a very lofty kind of place to be in. It's overwhelming. It's humbling at the same time. And but it's not lost on me, especially, you know, given where I've come from. I know that sometimes things seem impossible, but you don't realize how possible they actually are until someone makes that difference for you. So, you know, again, that's very humbling to think that I might ever be in that position to do that for anyone. So, yeah.
I think that you are, and I'm really grateful for you for making time to have this conversation. Was there anything that you'd like to add to our chat?
I just think I think for Canadians in general, in this kind of overarching conversation, I think it would be a missed opportunity for us not to recognize, I think, the struggles that our First Nations brothers and sisters are going through. And I think that is a root cause of a lot of the issues that have come to the forefront in terms of anti-Black racism and just racism in general in Canada. I do believe that, you know, that is a root wound that has festered for too long. And I'd be hard pressed to be convinced that racism in this country can be addressed to the degree which it needs to be until we take a look at our First Nations brothers and sisters. And that's not to take away from from what we've seen happening, but I do believe there is room for us to walk in tandem with that, with our Indigenous family there too. So,
well, it's actually interesting that June is National Indigenous History Month, and it's being overshadowed by the anti-Black racism rallies and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I know that the rallies that I've attended that have blended in conversations around the issues surrounding the Indigenous community and population. I just would love that conversation to rise up. I think it's all part of our future solution, and there's a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely.
Thank you for raising that.
Yeah, it's been eye-opening for me to travel to other parts of the country and see it firsthand, and it definitely does exist. And I guess I'll leave it at that. And just because you know, I don't want to take up too much.
That'll be another whole interview.
Exactly. But I do think there's room for us to walk lockstep with joint causes. So yeah.
Well, thank you for doing all of this. And I know the struggle is real for you. We're going to be thinking about you as we watch you on the news and just sending some support your way. And thank you. Really appreciate your time.
And thank you for the work that you've been doing in the community, you know, well before this all came to light. You know, thank you for giving us a voice, and thank you for making us aware, and all of your efforts. Again, before this is a long-standing cause, and you've been there. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It all starts with one, right? You have to do something, or if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Yeah.
We're in it together. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Bye.